Welcome to Keep Taking Ground, the Saxophone podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Ryan, and we're back with season number 2. Again, I want to say a huge thank you to everyone that tuned in and commented, shared the episodes from last season, and subscribed to the channel. I'm excited to bring you 10 new conversations this season. And if you're new to the podcast, welcome. You can expect conversations with award-winning and in-demand saxophonists from around the world and across jazz and contemporary styles. I really believe that award-winning and in-demand saxophonists know something that the rest of us don't yet know. And that's what really I'm curious about. So I want to create a resource that would help you to keep taking ground in your personal, professional, musical, and creative journeys and connect with the saxophone community worldwide. So without further ado, today's guest is a multiple Juno Award-winning saxophonist, composer, and educator who has been a leading figure in the Canadian jazz community and beyond for over 25 years. He's performed with the Vanguard Jazz Orchestra, Maria Schneider, Christian McBride, Kenny Werner, Phil Woods, Brian Blade, and Randy Brecker, to name a few. He holds a bachelor's degree from McGill University in Montreal and a master's degree from Manhattan School of Music in New York. He's performed extensively in Canada, the United States, Japan, Thailand, and many other places, including a 9-month tour with the legendary trumpeter Maynard Ferguson. He's currently a faculty member at both the University of Toronto and York University. And it's totally my pleasure to welcome the amazing Kelly Jefferson to the podcast. Kelly, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Jesse. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Man, it's my pleasure. I've been a huge fan. It feels weird saying fan, but I've been following your music for since I moved to Canada. Really, I met you in 2014 during the Youth Jazz Canada workshop, and it's no doubt you've been one of the huge Canadian saxophonists that have influenced me and many other players for generations. So again, it's my pleasure to have you. And let's start right at the beginning. How did you get a saxophone in your hand?
Okay. Well, thanks again, Jesse. It's
Yeah.
it's really my pleasure to be here, and um, yeah, I'm also a big fan of yours. So I grew up in the prairies of Canada in Regina, Saskatchewan. I come from a musical family. My dad is a piano player, uh, essentially self-taught, but has made his living in music in Regina, which is where he was born, and he's
Mm-hmm.
spent his whole life there. My older brother plays the drums, and music was always around. It was around our house, and my older brother was playing, and as he was a member of a community band organization in Regina
Okay.
at that time, sponsored by the Lions Clubs. It was called the
Oh
Regina
yeah.
Lions Band,
Good old Lions
and
Club. Yeah.
yeah, and has a huge history of uh, youth music
Yeah.
initiatives throughout Regina. So it was a citywide uh, band program, and so my brother joined the band, and I went to the concerts, as a young kid, and I was, I loved going to the concerts, and I was struck by the saxophone specifically because of how it looked.
Why not?
I mean, I wish I could say, yeah, I wish I could say it was some sort of, I felt the artistic calling from hearing the tone of the saxophone, but really it was just because I thought it looked cool.
Yeah.
Um, and so my dad at the time ran a music studio where he and a partner hired musicians and teachers from different instruments and everything, and they rented a studio space. So I would go and hang out there, on the weekends, and whenever I could, basically. But I was curious about the saxophone, but the saxophone teacher only taught there, I think, on Saturdays or something, and
Okay.
the horns weren't there for me to play, and I wouldn't have played them anyway, snooping around the rooms or something. So my dad said, "Look, Bill Freeman was his name, and Bill had a break in his schedule, or maybe after he was done his lessons, and he agreed to just kind of show me the saxophone, and I played a
Nice.
little bit. And this studio that my dad had was right across the street from one of the local music stores. So we went right across and rented me an alto,
Nice.
and that was it. Um, and so I started playing in the Lions Band in Regina.
Hmm.
I was 10. I was 10 years old when I started,
Yeah.
and like I said, it was never. It was very natural, I guess, for me to be involved with music, and it was more of a social thing for me
Right.
from the
Because your
beginning.
family was already involved, in
Yeah,
music. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so I was in the Lions Band until I graduated high school,
Yeah.
and also involved in my school music programs as well. And the Lions Band gave us the opportunities to perform quite a bit. We took summer trips, and
Yeah.
we had this big trip to Europe when I was 16. It was a
Wow.
big, it was a big uh, moment. A lot of life affirming things for me.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
again, it was I guess, the band certainly taught us musical skills and how to play as an ensemble and play together. And
Yeah. What kind of
different.
material were you guys playing then?
Well, it
Then.
was a concert band,
Okay.
primarily a concert band, which
Yeah.
was also a marching band.
Okay.
And they had jazz band as well. They had three different bands, um, which that was optional. But everybody that was in the band did concert band and marching band, and there
Gotcha.
was, we'd go to music festivals and things like that and have concerts, and
Yeah. Yeah.
um, went down to the States quite a bit for our summer tours as well. And so it was concert band repertoire, and that's really when I started playing. I switched to tenor when I joined the jazz band,
Okay.
and so I played tenor from the time I guess I was maybe 12 years old. Um, and because my brother was a drummer, I actually got involved in like more of the drumline, like marching percussion.
Yeah.
Once I was in the older groups, I started playing bass drum first, and then I switched to snare drum, um, and so that was like just for the marching band, and then I played saxophone in concert band and jazz band.
Cool. Cool. Cool.
Um, and so I could certainly, I was able to read music.
Oh.
I loved being in the jazz band, uh, even just to explore in terms of soloing. Like that was my first real, uh, but my first real exploration into
Yeah. Yeah.
into soloing. But as far as training, I mean, I didn't really have much theoretical background. I
Hmm.
didn't take ear training courses or anything like that until I got to university. So,
Gotcha.
and I think it's important for me to maybe mention that, certainly, giving myself an opportunity to think back to those times. I mean, there were great instructors in the
Yeah.
band program. And I'm also extremely grateful to my family for giving me the opportunity to pursue something that I was interested in with zero pressure, you know. Um,
Yeah.
and, I was in my last year of high school, and it all kind of happened quite, quickly, I guess, for me, where
Yeah.
I thought, well, I really love music. I love the saxophone. I love playing in jazz band. I think I want to try to pursue this,
So let's talk about that. So you moved from the Prairies, Regina, and
yes.
you went to McGill. So from the Prairies to Montreal. So let's talk about, different part of Canada altogether. So let's talk about that. What was that transition like, and your period of undergrad study?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it was definitely a really important time for me. So I sent an audition tape to McGill when I applied there.
Yeah.
Um, and when I found that I got accepted, uh, I was able to make it happen and go to Montreal. There
Yeah.
was also a few other musicians that were from Regina that went to different high schools, but through our parents or somehow we found out that we were going to McGill at the same time. And one in particular was a great piano player named Tilden Webb,
Okay.
who now lives in Vancouver, and is a fantastic musician. And so we connected before we left to Montreal, and our parents, of course, booked the same flight for us and everything. And we flew to Montreal. But for me, I had never been to Montreal until I went to actually start
Right.
the first semester of my undergrad, and I lived in residence, and After that, after the first year, I ended up rooming with Tilden for the remainder of the undergrad, and I did spend a total of 10 years in Montreal after that. But really for me, like I mentioned, I had everything to gain, I think, from being in a program like that because I really didn't know all that much. And, it was, I like I said, I could read music, I guess, at a good enough level and understand some of the stylistic things, maybe about playing in the jazz ensemble and
Yeah.
playing with an ensemble. And I guess my ear was okay, but again, I didn't really, I wasn't really practicing very much in high school. I mean, I was, practicing meant going to a rehearsal with the Lions band or any number of things. I mean, we would jam at home and stuff, but all just
Right.
very, very informal. And I mean, I took the odd lesson, great musical community in Regina for sure. And, you know, uh, but when I got to McGill, I really had my eyes opened, and my first teacher actually for private lessons was Kirk MacDonald,
Oh,
who
wow. Okay.
most Canadian saxophonists and musicians will know Kirk, and it
Yeah.
was just by sheer luck for me certainly. Kirk was living in Ottawa at the time, which is about a 2.5 hour drive from Montreal.
Mhm.
Um, and he would come in and teach. I guess it was maybe six of us or something. He would come in and teach private lessons and book some gigs in town.
Yeah.
And he was my first serious private teacher. And
That's crazy. I mean, Kirk
yeah,
has taught so many people.
oh,
That's
I
crazy.
know.
Wow.
And again, I didn't know who Kirk was,
Right, right.
but it was just the timing of that one year, and it
Hmm.
ended up just being one of the best things. And I really did. Uh, I mean, I learned a lot, but I also it was just a great time for me to. I mean, I got my butt kicked, basically.
Well, I was just gonna say, I mean, if you were playing music really informally, and you to then have Kirk McDonald as your first private lesson teacher,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
must have shaken you up a lot.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Not to mention, and I know that you were sort of asking about the whole process of moving to a new city. So
Yeah,
I
yeah,
so I
yeah.
was right out of high school, 18 years
Hmm.
old, and moving to a brand new city. And I really, I feel like I did do a lot of my growing up in Montreal. My first time away from home, and I went back after my first year of my undergrad. I went back to Regina for that summer, and
Yeah,
I never went back. And it wasn't by choice or anything. It's just I was certainly, I found a great community in Montreal, and
yeah,
I had some playing opportunities outside of school, and the more experience I got, the busier I was,
yeah.
and it was fantastic, and I certainly, like I said, I mean, um, I felt a fair amount of pressure because of how much I didn't know, and of course, there
Right.
are always situations in that environment, and especially at a great school like McGill. Where I was extremely intimidated in a lot
Right.
of ways. But I think I was a bit naive to some of that, and fortunately, I didn't let it get the best of me. And I just, I mean, I also loved doing it, and I really throughout my undergrad, I just wanted to play as much as
Yeah.
possible, and so many things that I was learning. Obviously, I'm not sitting here saying that I digested everything because that was impossible, but
Yeah.
I just took what I could,
Hmm.
and I kept a lot of the as much as I possibly could, and just tried to play and just learn, and
Yeah.
and I kind of went the other way from how I started, where I really got into studying. I was practicing a lot, and I just listening and transcribing and going out to hear music, and it was a really, really important time for me. Um,
I feel like if that's super important, that bit you shared about um being in situations where you felt intimidated, whether by the talents around you or by the professors or by the situation, or maybe feeling not like you weren't prepared for the situation. I remember
yeah.
the very first episode of of this podcast. Melissa Aldana mentioned the key to musical growth for her was managing her ego, in terms of those situations where you feel out of your element and just staying calm and say, this is what I came here for, and just doing what you need to push through to the next thing and really make your weaknesses a strength, uh,
Absolutely. Yeah,
yeah.
I could not agree more with that. And the more music I was checking out, the more I was practicing and playing,
Hmm.
I was certainly excited about, about all of these new things.
Yeah.
But again, I come back to the community aspect and the social aspect of learning music in post-secondary. And again, I had a really great experience, and
Yeah.
uh, I also just tried to focus on what I was there to do. I mean, um, and it certainly worked out for me in that um, I was always fortunate outside of school. I mean, I never really thought like I was in my last year of high school. Oh, I think I'll go and study jazz saxophone at McGill if I'm able to do it. And again, I realize how great I'm how fortunate I am to be able to say that and to do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And I think about that again all the time. I was never forced or was never any pressure on me to
Yeah.
make something of myself. Of course, I wanted to do my best, but I never felt that outside pressure. Where now I hear so many stories of people, and it can just be crippling to
Yeah.
some, where they feel like there's already all this pressure. And of course, I want to set high standards for myself in what I
Mhm.
do, and that now, I mean, it means different things. What it is I do, it's become this huge sort of thing. And it certainly started for me at McGill. A lot of things really, a lot of lights went on in terms of the music, and I just trying to piece it all together. And it was a super
Yeah.
exciting time. But it was all really my own doing. You know what I mean? It was, and again, it all started very innocently for me.
Yeah.
And I have, honestly, just the way that my path has gone, I never could have planned it the way that it's happened. And one positive experience has led to a lot of other positive
Yeah.
experiences. And everybody's path is a little bit different. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
uh,
Um,
you know, I sorry, yeah.
no, I was gonna say, well, let's talk about that part. So you finished undergrad, you lived in Montreal for about 10 years, and obviously at some point you moved to New York to study at Manhattan. So let's talk about that.
Yeah. So again, I guess I've mentioned my initial experience with jazz school, with post-secondary education.
Hmm.
Um, so I had a somewhat different experience for my grad studies.
Mm.
After I graduated from McGill, I spent the following year in Montreal, and I actually ended up playing at this place called the Old Munich, which
Okay.
opened for Expo 67 in Montreal, and it was basically this big Oktoberfest bar, hangout, music venue, dance place that was in the style of, Bavaria, so
Okay.
they brought everything over from Germany, and
Wow.
everyone's sort of in costume, and so I was in this, well, a couple different bands, but they were basically polka bands
Hmm.
that played all kinds of stuff besides polkas, and it was 6 nights a
Hmm.
week for six
Oh.
months, and there were long gigs and a lot of playing, and that's I was also kind of had my eyes opened on that, on that gig, because it's like, well, this is what a jazz degree got me. Basically, I'm playing polka tunes and top 40 hits, on the weekends on this rotating stage in a pair of lederhosen.
Wow.
It was,
Wow.
but I mean, it was great. It was great. So it was during that year, part of that year. So a really great friend of mine who I'm thankful we're still in touch and we're still really close friends. We've made music together. We met in our first year at McGill. The trombonist Kelsley Grant,
Yeah.
who is a professor at Humber College
Hmm.
and is here in Toronto. Um, and so he said, I'm thinking about auditioning and applying for my master's degree at Manhattan School of Music. And so one thing led to another, and I thought, well, yeah, maybe I'll go down and do the audition, and we'll see where it leads.
Yeah.
So I went down with them and did the audition. got accepted and went the following year. So this was I graduated McGill in 1992, and so this is fall of 1993.
Okay.
I went down to New York and I got into Bob Mincer's saxophone studio.
Yeah.
Got to study with Bob, a fantastic teacher and just a great person. And
Right.
at that time, I went to his house in Brooklyn and took lessons in his little studio upstairs, and
Yeah.
all very surreal. And again, it felt very similar to going from Regina to Montreal did, and
Right.
now Montreal to New York was like, oh man, here we go.
Yeah.
Um, and so it was a 2-year degree. Um, and I went back to Montreal after the first year. I was fortunate enough to get some funding for some of the expenses for that first year, which
Yeah.
I applied for and did not get for the subsequent year. So what ended up happening is I just said, okay, I'll stay in Montreal, and I'll reapply and I'll go back the following year and finish
Hmm.
school. So during that year is when I started teaching at McGill University. So
Okay.
and at that time it was, students could request someone in the community as a private teacher, and that's kind of how it started. So
Right.
I taught a couple of private students, and that led to some small ensembles. And
Anybody notable that that has a career in music, that we might know that you taught during that period of time?
oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, one of the people that comes to mind, I guess, is Al McLean,
Yeah.
who
Wow.
is still in. He's in Montreal, and he's
Yeah.
also an amazing saxophone technician, and he's just
Yeah.
amazing. But I mean, man, I can't tell you that I taught Al much of anything, though. He was already playing at that time. He was already playing at such a high level, Um, but yeah, and again, as far as how things have happened for me from the teaching side, that's really when I started teaching at the post-secondary level, and that would have been fall of '94, I
Okay.
guess.
Okay.
Um, and so I had every intention of going back to New York the following year,
Hmm.
and for a bunch of different reasons, that one year turned into 5 years. I was in Montreal. I was playing in a bunch of different bands and really doing a similar thing that I've been doing here in Toronto for a little over 20 years.
Hmm.
And but I do just remember thinking, it wasn't so much about getting the degree or the piece of paper. It was about spending more time in New York and just trying to
Yeah.
absorb being in a place like that. I really feel like it's a unique place,
Hmm.
certainly for the arts and certainly for music and certainly for jazz music, I would say.
Yeah. I'm going to shift gears here, Kelly. I
Yes.
want to ask you, what have you been in pursuit of on the saxophone, or maybe even creatively, artistically, over
Mhm.
these, years of playing the saxophone and being a musician, a leader, sideman, etc.
Wow. Um, well, I guess, I mean, like everybody, when it comes down to it, I feel like uh, I've really tried to maintain a consistent relationship with sound and my approach to it on the saxophone and how it's developed and changed over the years, and what I'm able to do maybe day to day to
Hmm.
just be in touch with tone production on the instrument.
Okay.
I think that's I guess the first natural answer that I would say.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
when I first started studying and trying to develop my repertoire and learn as much about the music and the history of the music, as I could, and just play as many different styles as possible and with as many people as possible. Um, when I was first starting out, I really didn't get hooked with composition.
Oh.
And I felt actually pretty intimidated to write anything because in
Hmm.
my mind there were so many great songs that I didn't know and I wanted to know and to learn and to study that I didn't. It took me a long time to realize uh, the connection between improvisation and composition. And as
Okay.
soon as I was sort of, steered in amazing directions. And I mean, I credit a lot of great teachers that I've had. But the timing for me, studying with Dick Oates in particular, he was someone who really set me down that beautiful path of really exploring
Yeah.
and really exploring for yourself and taking things that you've learned, but also just trying to find something on your own and
Hmm.
so that's been something that I'm definitely still searching as far as that goes. I mean, I wish I could sit here and say that I compose something every day in the same way as I try to play the saxophone. I don't. But a lot of my compositions, and certainly my early ones, they kind of start off as little exercises or little things that I might want to try to dig into a little bit more, and
Yeah.
that leads to something else. And again, fortunate enough to play with amazing musicians and to collaborate and to hear my music played by them
Yeah.
way better than I could have ever, imagined it. But certainly along the way, I mean, I feel because I've been fortunate to have, I guess, a successful career. I don't know. I know that means different things to different people,
Right. Yep.
but
Yep.
uh, certainly from a playing standpoint, as a freelance musician, I've 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 had steady work, and there are things and skills that I think I've developed along the way. I've also learned about um, dealing with people and
Hmm. Hmm.
the being part of something larger than you and how you want to find your way with that. And
I'm really curious about that, in terms of the things and the skills you've learned, developed, that have given you, well, put you in a space where you are an in-demand saxophone player. Can you share some of the things that you've learned, or the skills you feel like if um are in demand, the skills that are in demand as a saxophone player?
Sure. Again, a lot of my experience is varied in that I like being in situations where whoever is leading in charge of the music or the composer or the conductor or whoever it is,
Hmm.
sometimes they hear it in a very specific way and they give me instructions that might be more specific than I would be expecting. I love that challenge because it means that I have to find ways to use the tools that I work on and try to give them what they want or what they're hearing in the music. Um, and I love that challenge, and it also has helped me sort of hear the instrument, I think, in a lot of different ways because of being allowed those opportunities to try to create something that might not come naturally, but something that is sort of required of me in certain situations. Um,
Hmm.
Aside from, I would say even just professionalism of varying descriptions, I guess. There is something to showing up on time and showing up prepared and being easy to work with. Um, and I think really the big takeaway for me with everything that I surround myself with now, and I try to reflect on it a little bit, but I also just try to keep it in the moment. And I think really
Hmm.
you can learn from any situation, and for me, I have to learn by listening to
Yeah.
what's around me, and
Yeah.
um, you know, there are, you know, I say this to my students all the time, but uh, it's because I believe this to be true. Is there are levels of all of there are levels to listening and how deeply you can listen and how you may need to listen for something very specific, or it's even just you know, pick up on what's happening and, collectively and what's the mood,
Right.
what's the
Right. Right.
mood
Right.
in the room and what are sometimes maybe to say something and what are other times to not, and just sit back and listen and,
Yeah.
uh, and it's not always musical, in content, but I think that's just important. And, I've certainly I can't even tell you, based on the opportunities that I've had. Um, I've just learned so much about myself that it still really comes down to gratitude for me, and
Mm.
always feeling like there's, like I said, there's always something to learn in every situation, and it kind of runs the gamut for me. I'm fortunate to play original music with the composers of that music. Like that's a very personal thing. I get to collaborate with really close friends and dear friends. I also get to make music with people that I've just met 30 seconds previous. And it's still, I want to take advantage of all those situations as much as I can. I don't want to take for granted that
Yeah.
I've been playing with somebody for 20 years and
Mm.
that we just assume these things. I want to really feel what's important about that, and establishing these long-term musical relationships that a lot of times for me, and still uh, came from people that I went to school with.
Yeah.
Still, and sometimes they come out of the picture, and sometimes they're back in, and you pick up where you left off. I will always be inspired by that. And also, um, I also realize that, and certainly this time has sort of put that even more to light, but it can be taken away very easily as well. And
Mm.
I also want to remind myself that music does not owe me one thing. I mean, just because you're busy and you're successful and you're doing a bunch of things, and um, you know, uh, it's important for me to just take advantage of as much of that as I can, and realize, like I said, that you know I owe so much to music and to
Mhm.
being a musician. It's really shaped who I am as a person, and not just the musical side, but I would say a lot of the relationships and the people that you meet along the way. The opportunity to travel and to experience new things, and
Yeah.
um, I guess another thing that I'll certainly say is I don't want to sit here and say that it's been easy, easy, either. There's always going to be challenges, and there's
Yeah.
ups and downs, and I questioned a lot of things as I was doing it. When I left Montreal after those 5 years to go back to New York, I thought I was shooting myself in the foot, and that I had to say, sorry, I'm not going to teach at McGill. I'm going to
Right.
quit all these bands that I was in, and it had nothing to do with me wanting to leave Montreal. I just
Right.
felt this need to do it, but I was terrified at the time,
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but just getting back to that, I mentioned I have sort of a different relationship maybe with post-secondary, because I then all of a sudden I was back finishing my master's degree, and I just had to be in school and to be a student again.
Yeah.
And I really appreciated that time, because I think I got more out of it than had I done 2 consecutive years. I
Right.
had 5 years of playing and experience and teaching,
Huh.
and I really feel like that second year, especially, that's when I studied with Dick Oates,
Hmm.
um, and just you know I think I was more ready to sort of jump in, and I might have had a better idea of just the perspective that I needed to.
That really resonates with me, Kelly. I did part of my undergraduate program at Berkeley, and I was back home for 3 years, and then I moved to Toronto to finish up. And I feel like if the challenge of feeling like, if, oh man, am I ever going to finish my degree? Am I ever going to be able to accomplish this thing and finish it? Those 3 years of grinding and trying to figure out how I could actually do this
Yeah,
prepared me to have the right perspective, so that when I was back in it, I felt like if I was able to get a lot out of the program at Humber, because of having the right
yeah,
perspective. So,
yeah, of
and I
course.
always try to share with people, whether it's a student of mine or just somebody that I'm having a conversation with. I feel like I feel like if this is probably true for you too, everything that you're involved in, your relationships, the challenges, your interests, um every experience play affects they or contributes to the direction and your path. And in a sense, nothing is lost. There's
Right.
nothing is ever
Yeah.
um
If it's a bad situation, then you know how not to do it the next time, or
right.
for next time it's not all, yeah, exactly, it's not all positive. And
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt,
No worries.
Jesse. I
Yeah.
was just,
Hmm.
certainly with coming into contact and getting to know a lot of post-secondary students over the years, teaching classes,
Hmm.
um, and sometimes students will ask me these kinds of questions, and where should I do my master's, and where, how do you recommend me going about doing this? And I think a lot of students feel pressure to do it when
Yeah.
they may not feel ready. And I just say,
Yeah.
or I try to remind them, these programs will always be around. And
Right.
and I think part of it is, certainly there's a lot of pressure to, move yourself forward. And but to be honest, it was certainly about learning about music and you know, all of the facets that means. But for me, it was the people. The people make these programs,
Mm,
and you will. It's not something that I don't think you should force yourself to do if you're not ready to do it.
right.
And at the same time, had I felt like I was ready to move to New York, I never would have moved there. So there's always that, you want to push yourself, and
Yeah. Yeah.
something was telling me to do it. And maybe, I certainly credit my friend Kelsley for
Hmm.
kind of saying, well, yeah, maybe you should come and join me. I mean,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
was,
Yeah.
but so again, it's part of the, it's who you surround yourself with, and sort of
Absolutely.
you see
Absolutely.
their direction. And I've had so many, supportive people, and just from all areas of my musical life,
Yeah.
my educational life, my professional life. I mean, it's great. It's certainly not something that, although we like to think that we're in a practice room by ourselves, and we're thinking about, us all the time. It's really about what you can project and what you can give to others.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I've certainly been on the receiving end of that for a really long time, and I'm grateful for it.
Yeah. Absolutely, man. No, I want to go back to something that you shared earlier on, when we were talking about what you've been in pursuit of. Actually, I want to ask a question. I think I kind of know the answer, but in terms of something that has become part of your musical DNA, um, yeah,
Yeah,
what would you say that is?
yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, sound for me
Right.
is priority number one, and
Yeah.
it might be an obvious thing to say,
Yeah.
because of course we are we are attached to our sound. We are, regardless of how we may think about it. And this is something that for me, again, when I was first starting out, even when I was at McGill, of course I wanted to get a good sound, but I was doing it by trying to just copy sounds that I liked and that I heard. I
Right.
wasn't really thinking about, like, if someone were to sit down and say, well, how are you doing that?
Yeah.
I wouldn't be able to answer them. And eventually I have, changed in that, I like to think about the mechanics of things, and
Right.
how
Right. Right.
and how that can lead to a more consistent approach.
Hmm.
And certainly with the way that I like to work on sound, um, I have a set thing that I've been doing probably for 20, 25 years.
Hmm.
But it feels different every day, and I know what I need to get out of it to do it.
Right.
Um, and um, I spend time focusing on it so that when I'm playing music, I'm not really thinking about it in that way.
Would you mind sharing
That's
some
the
of that
hope.
was right now, just in some of the things you've been working on over the years for song?
Oh, sure, sure. Basically, I mean, it's long tones and overtone matching,
Cool.
essentially.
Cool.
And I guess part of the path for me, I guess, has even tried to just differentiate what is like the actual tone of the instrument, and then everything else. In other words,
Mm,
things that we're drawn to,
yeah. Yeah.
vibrato and articulation, and
Yeah.
scoops, and like the vocal part of being a
Yeah.
saxophonist, which is
Yeah.
great. It's certainly one thing that draws me to it. But
Yeah.
I sort of needed to eliminate all of that and then sort of realize, well, what are some things that I can do to add to the sound?
Mm,
Everything, aside from tone production, is an extension of your sound, and it doesn't make up anything about the tone. You know what I
mm.
mean? And so it's just different ways of manipulating it, I
Yeah,
guess.
that's a
So
that's a cool way to think about it. I feel like if I and I'm totally guilty of this when I was younger, just in terms of trying to add the other things without starting fundamentally with good sound.
Oh, I mean, I pretty much tried to tell you earlier that that's exactly what I was doing, but I also think that's great, just kind of jumping in,
Right, right,
and
right.
again,
Learning by doing.
yes,
Yeah, yeah,
absolutely,
yeah,
and I've
yeah,
sort of needed to go back and revisit these things,
yeah.
because of that. But now um, ultimately it's still about just putting a little bit of focus on it, because look, I mean, if you don't spend some time really listening to the sound that's coming out of your horn, who's going to do that? Or how
Right,
do you
right,
expect other
right.
people to listen? Or
Yeah.
what do you think they're listening for?
Hmm.
Like, so and again, most of this exercise for me and just how I think about practicing is really just about the importance of how I listen to myself, and um, you know how much I'm really able to contribute to what comes out of the horn.
Yeah. Huh.
And again, the other side that's just as important for me is not to think about it when the music is being made.
Right.
And again,
Practice. There's
there's
this pretty famous Miles Davis quote: "Practice sober, play drunk." I think I'm messing up the quote, but something like that.
yeah, yeah.
Something like that.
It's I have sort of I guess it's a double-edged thing along those lines about just practicing and playing. But
Yeah.
um, you know, I, somewhere in there, even though I might be practicing a very specific thing, I
Hmm.
want to practice the way I want to play.
Right.
There's so
Right.
many,
Right.
in other words, if I'm working on a tune, then I want to imagine, I want to play it in time in some way. I want to
Hmm.
imagine a rhythm section playing with me, or playing along with another horn, something that puts me in that moment. It's more of a mindset, I suppose, but it
Yeah.
helps to sort of streamline the practice. I think everyone's guilty of like, oh, how does that tune go again? And you just sort of, I mean, the notes, you kind of remind yourself of what the notes are, but you don't work on all of the other elements simultaneously, which is what we need to do when we play.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's kind of where that's coming from. Practice the way you want to play. Make sure that you're embracing as many of the elements, and that you're listening for these things, so that you have more to offer when you play with others. At least
So
that's been
I
my
want to
approach.
put a pin there, Kelly, because I think that's super important.
Okay.
Because I feel like if, myself having gone through an undergrad program, um, and I think there's a lot of undergraduate or maybe just students of saxophone and what's the word I want to use? Aspiring professional saxophone players that might feel the frustration of knowing, having enough awareness of where they're at musically, knowing where they want to go, having a bunch of information that somebody maybe on the other end, a professional award-winning saxophone player, they have the same information, but they don't know how to organize that information in the practice room to get there. And I feel like if what you just shared about practicing the way that you want to sound sets up a framework for like an approach in the practice room. So we'll come back to that, but I
Yes,
want
of
to give
course.
you the opportunity to just share how you worked on sound.
Yeah, of course, of course. I wanted to mention, so
Mhm,
practice the way you want to play.
mhm.
And then the other side, or kind of the addendum to that, is don't practice on the bandstand.
Oh, hmm,
Right? In other words, just because I've worked on this line in all 12 keys,
yeah,
I'm going to make sure I play that line, whether or not it makes sense in what's going on in the music or not.
yeah,
Or you don't, just because you might work on a tune and play 10 choruses, it doesn't
yeah.
mean that you play 10 choruses on the bandstand, right? It
But
doesn't.
I feel like if that's a really, sorry, Kelly, I feel like if that's a really, I agree. I feel like if it's an abstract, well, not abstract, it's a subjective idea. And how do you find the balance between
That's
knowing?
it.
No, it's tricky. So since we're here, let's talk about that. How do you find the balance?
Um, for me, the longer that I play, the more music that I play, the balance for me is all in the fundamentals and coming
Okay.
back to the fundamentals, I
Oh,
guess, and again, all of the different levels that I want to make sure I'm listening. I mean, I kind of think of the act of playing this music with people in the moment is like there is a lot of multitasking going on from
yeah.
everyone. And whether we're aware of it or not, it's still happening on some level. So part of the practicing, like specific practice for me, is about maybe just taking some of the layers away
Mm,
and isolating some of those things so I have at least a better understanding of my concept of it. So
yeah.
like I said, I can offer a little bit more, hopefully, when I'm playing with others, or at least give myself an opportunity to listen to them as I'm playing. Right. This is the other thing.
Would you?
Is Yeah.
Sorry, no, go ahead. Finish the thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, this whole idea of what do you listen for,
Yeah.
in the moment of playing music. We practice all this stuff and it's supposed to prepare for these moments that just go by, and then they're done. So
Great.
a
Great.
lot of this it
Wow.
might feel like it's counterintuitive, but this
Mhm.
is where for me it all comes back to my understanding of some fundamental things. And I think this is where these long tones came from. I mean, like I said, I didn't think about a lot of this stuff for a really long time.
Okay.
So again, a lot of things with my approach have happened because of experiences that I had as well. Like,
Hmm. Hmm.
when I first started playing with Maynard Ferguson's band, uh, it's a loud band, and we were playing loud. And I mean, I remember, certainly within the first week of my first tour, I lost my voice. I couldn't talk. I was pushing, right?
Yeah.
And so all I could really think to do was to balance it with really getting into a regimented warm up where I was
Great.
playing as quietly as I could. And
Mm-hmm.
that led me to really understanding that my tone, we all strive to have a warm, full, even tone in all registers and in all dynamic levels. And that's certainly what has led me down the way that I work on sound is that,
Yeah.
I want to strip all that other stuff away. And, that was sort of what spearheaded, a lot of my sound concept or the way that I've been working on it.
Hmm.
And, fast forward at the end of that gig with Maynard Ferguson, I never thought twice about really I got a lot out of playing in that band because I also realized it's not just about volume. It's about, you can work on your sound and have control of it for when you're playing ensemble stuff and whatever. But I want my tone to be the same no matter what the
Hmm.
dynamic level is. And so that's what I try to do, and that's where overtones and matching and
Okay.
everything, I guess,
Cool.
comes in. So I have a set kind of routine that I do, and again I do it in time. I just put a metronome on 60 BPM
Okay.
or the ballad one of the ballad settings on Drum Genius,
Yep. Yep.
and I do the same duration all the time. I start on the the first harmonic off of the low B flat, and I go as chromatically up as I can. Um, I normally have a tuner as well, so I can sort of see where
Right. Yep.
things are slotted in. But again, I mean, for me, the whole principle behind the overtones is the horn is resonating more when it's when you're playing the lower notes. So
Yep. Yep.
that's the sound that I want to keep reinforcing, so that
Yep.
I'm not, you know, uh, I refer to it as being accused as just being a button pusher.
Right.
So that, oh well, I know this note is here, so I'll just finger the note and play. But
Yeah. like a
it's
cheat.
about sort of pre-hearing the note and the quality of the sound, and so I need to reinforce that, every
Yeah.
day, so that it's there again. It's there when I need it. Um, so I do it. I do the overtone for 4 counts,
Hmm.
switch to the real fingering for 4 counts, back
Yeah.
to the overtone for 4, rest for 4.
Okay. And then up
And
chromatically.
yeah, exactly. So, um, go up semitones.
Yeah.
Maybe I could. So I'll do B, C, C sharp. C sharp is a good one to do because of the fact that it's
It's open.
an open
Yeah.
fingering,
Yeah. Yeah.
and of course it's not about getting it perfect. It's about, again, hearing the overtone, knowing that that is the actual tone of the instrument.
Yeah. And you're trying to match it as closely as possible.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
Right.
And
Yeah.
things that I've needed to focus on, basically. I think of 3 main elements, I guess: the air quality,
Mm-hmm.
what my embouchure is doing,
Mm-hmm.
specifically my bottom lip,
Mm-hmm.
and my tongue position, which is
Oh,
coming from the Joe Allard,
yeah.
Dave Liebman concept. And I really, I'm totally on board with that. I think it's
And is
opened
your tongue
everything.
really low and the back high?
So in order to control the pitch,
Right.
I have to, most people, I guess, and myself included, you have to bring the overtone down in pitch. It's going to be a little
Yeah.
sharper. So it's that split second adjustment of making sure that, if you've got your tongue really low, in order to get that note in tune, then you have to bring your tongue position up in order to keep the
Slightly.
pitch. That's what I had to do for that note,
Right.
you know.
Right.
And
Right.
again,
Right.
just
Right.
trying to blur the lines as much as possible. And something about
Mm-hmm.
my tone and about my sound, if I'm working on this, it's always one of those 3 elements that may need to be slightly adjusted, and
Mm-hmm.
you put a different read on, and it's a completely different ball
Yeah.
game altogether. So,
You-
again, it's consistency over perfection every time. But
Okay.
but after doing it for as long as I have, I mean, I've sort of been through a lot of different, relationships with it. But I certainly realize the importance of it. And so again, I work my way up to the top. A couple of
Mm-hmm.
things that I do, once we get so the F off the B flat,
Mm-hmm.
so second one,
Yeah.
and so if I do the G sharp off the C sharp,
Yeah.
I'll do high A off low D next,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of like it's a break point on the
Yeah.
horn,
Yeah. Yeah.
because this vent all of a sudden comes into the equation. So I like to
Mm-hmm.
use that one, and then I do high B flat off low E flat.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I match it, I play the high B flat, and when I go back down, I go to the low B flat.
Oh, okay. Cool.
So it's
Yeah.
just how I've done it for a while.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like a little pivot thing. So
Mm-hmm.
so low E flat, I guess.
Yeah.
Right.
That was pretty consistent.
And
Across
then
those notes.
yeah, it wasn't quite there for me, but I appreciate you saying so. And then B same, C the same. So now we're high C sharp.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll just fast forward a little bit. And
Yeah.
then
No
this
worries.
is where it gets a little weird. High D off the low B flat.
Okay. Yeah. So you don't ever use G for the high D.
No,
Okay. Cool.
no, I don't.
Yeah.
Maybe I should. That's good. I'll go back. So D sharp off the B.
Yeah.
The pitch is a bit funky, but
Yeah.
and then E off the low C, and
Yeah.
I'll do palm and front E.
Okay.
So I'll
Okay.
match both,
Yeah, yeah.
and the same with F. So then I go back to low B flat here.
For the high F. Okay.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
then I'll do palm. I'll do front first, and then palm.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so uh,
Yeah.
but when I do palm, then and again, this is all with the 4 counts in
Yes,
between.
yes,
It's all
yes,
one
yes.
series. It's about 6 minutes long, something like that.
For the whole
Um,
exercise chromatically.
yes, yeah.
Cool. Hmm.
Um, which is an
That's good
important
to
thing
know.
as
That's
well.
good to
Yes.
know. Yeah.
And again, it's taken a long time to get to that point, and I
Hmm.
feel certain, I mean, it's really about helping me get in touch with how I'm feeling physically on the horn, and
Hmm.
usually, I want to feel it right here, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then I do something as well where this is coming from, people like playing the mouthpiece, right, and
Hmm.
controlling the pitch with your tongue position. So I do one. Where so I'm on the palm F now, and I'll
Yeah.
slur down 3 semitones.
Hmm.
So again, I'll do it. I'll do those quarter notes with
Yeah.
60 BPM,
Hmm.
and the same off of E. Then I'll go. I'll so now I'm on the high D.
Hmm.
I'll go right from that note and slur all the way down the minor third and back up. So
Hmm.
then I'll do the combinations of whole steps and half steps. So
Okay.
I'm totally speeding through this, but I would
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah.
I do it in time,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and then I'll stop when I get to the low D. The reason I like to do that is because normally, and we're all guilty of this. I'm probably the worst offender, but the higher you go on the horn, the more you feel like
Yeah.
you gotta come up. So this
Yeah.
is my reminder of just keep it open
Yeah.
and keep it relaxed. And I've got some other some other things. And this is it's certainly I didn't come up with any of this stuff. I mean this is out there, and it's just the way that I've really found consistency with
Hmm.
sticking to a similar thing, because it gives me everything I need really to make sure I'm listening to all of these things,
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
very intently. And it's really about air. It's really about just putting air through the horn first. I do this at the
Hmm.
beginning of the day. So,
Right.
and again, keeping dynamics. I mean, for whatever reason, I've got the headphones on. I'm probably playing a little louder than I normally would. Obviously, the higher you go, it feels like you're playing louder. So I want to be aware of that as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, really, it's like I said, it's really by far now for me the most important thing I need to be in touch with on the instrument, because it's I guess thinking about pitch, it's not really, I'm not striving to be like, okay, I'm perfectly in tune in every single note. I need flexibility so that
Hmm.
when I'm playing maybe a vibraphone or something that's 442 or whatever, like knowing how I need to manipulate the pitch to match who it is I'm playing with.
Right.
And this comes into the great, like front line, like playing with other horn players or something, and kind of getting a sense of where they might hear and feel the
Yep.
pitch, and try to
Yep. Yep.
just,
Yep. Yep.
snuggle in there.
Yeah.
And so, again, this is not. I mean, it's a regimented thing that I do, but I want it to be as open and open ended and loose as possible, so that I can, I can try to use it in
Mhm.
those environments.
Well, Kelly, one of the things that have been really helpful for me since I've, left school, finished my undergrad, and is a shift in my perspective as like in the practice room. So I tend to think of myself as like the term I use is as a sound athlete. Um, I think there's something that's very well. There's playing music is a very physical thing,
Yes.
and I've been recently doing some lessons with John Gordon, and he
Oh,
sort of
great.
like reinforces that idea of like it kind of has to feel like work a little bit.
Yes,
If it doesn't feel like work, you're probably not putting enough air through the horn.
that's
And
it.
so that there's that idea of physicality. And so I find, the way that athletes train is that they have very set regimens that they go through every day. And some of them might be very specific, and then some of them, like you mentioned, might be a little bit more open-ended to give room to increase like the headroom of the exercise, whether it's lifting more weights or running slightly faster or running longer or whatever it is. So
Mhm.
I find that, you mentioned like the long tone exercise. So the overtone exercise takes about 6 minutes to complete. I find that musicians don't usually speak with that kind of language. And for me, that's been really important to say, hey, this thing takes this amount of time, because we're working with time all the time. you know
Yeah, and um, this exercise for me, I think one of the things that took the longest is to work it into something that doesn't take a long time. I mean,
yeah,
I know that different players have different approaches where they may
yeah,
not do these kinds of exercises, and then they'll do it like every second or third day, but they might do it for longer. Like it's really
right,
whatever works. But again, time management for me in this context has certainly been something that I've needed to learn
yeah,
how to
yeah.
do.
Same here, same
And
here.
it's also, because if you think about it, and this is definitely something that I address or I try to address with up and coming saxophonists or first year undergrad students, where really trying to use your time. It's not about the more things that you learn. It's like, well, now I have to add this amount of time to my practice and this amount of time,
Hmm.
and I understand that's going to be overwhelming.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, this is certainly what everybody kind of needs to filter through. And some of this for me has been, I don't want to say solved, but I've sort of, and this is over a bunch of years, of course, but, um, you know, really thinking away from the instrument also and trying to process things in your head. It's not like I'm not someone that just because I don't have the saxophone strapped to me, I'm not thinking about music in some way, or at least I want to,
Mhm.
I want to give myself the opportunity. I'm not saying I have to analyze everything musically going on at all times, but like, it's like even just to spend a little bit of time sort of focusing on something. It's like, wait, so if it's this chord and it's this, oh, I see. Like things that I might only think about if I'm practicing, or I might not think about it and just play the sound and not realize what it is. You know what I say?
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah,
or any number of those things. Like, this is definitely, it's like there's a moving target, and it's a work in progress, certainly for me, and always will be. Like, I'm cool with not needing to change that warm up exercise. I
yeah.
know that it's, because, and this is great actually. Just earlier in the week, I played a 2-night gig with the Carn Davidson Nine at the
Hmm.
Jazz Bistro in Toronto, and playing live music and playing 2 sets of music. There's a physical thing that
Yeah.
cannot be recreated in the practice room. Said
Mm. Yeah.
for me. And so the important thing for me was, again, the whole physical side of playing and the focus and the mental energy and all of those important things. But the morning of after the first gig is when I really was listening to that long tone exercise going, okay, now where are we? Like, because, when you start playing on a regular basis and you finish the gig and maybe the last tune was this up-tempo burner and you're playing super loud, you put the horn in the case, right? And then you pick it up the next day and it's like,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
this is what it's kind of like hitting, the factory reset or something.
Yeah, yeah,
Just
yeah.
just
You have this thing
starting,
you can come back to,
yeah.
kind of
But
as like a temperature checker.
yeah, totally.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
certainly, if I was, it was definitely I was feeling it physically both
yeah.
nights for sure. So I
Mhm.
wanted to just ease into it and kind of embrace the fact that it didn't necessarily feel like I could play another night like that right away. It
Mhm,
takes
mhm, mhm.
it takes a little bit of time. But again, but for me, that is one of the benefits of doing that exercise as consistently as I've been doing it
Yeah,
without needing to change it. Like I said, it's,
yeah,
some of this too isn't about how long I can hold a note for, right? It's like I always, I do it at 60 BPM, and I don't need to change that so that it helps me. I try to think about how I breathe and if I breathe in time, or a dynamic level maybe that I'm trying to shoot for.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that will, doing that consistently is going to help me in a lot of different musical situations.
Yeah.
I certainly have spent a lot of time um, trying to play in the low register of the horn, using a full sound
Yeah.
at a low dynamic without playing subtone,
Oh,
I
okay.
guess, right? Like
Yeah,
that's,
yeah.
and again, as an exercise, like I find myself sort of comparing it to the idea of when we listen to a recording, whether it's on headphones or speakers or whatever, and we adjust the volume.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The only thing that's changing is the volume, right?
Right.
The quality of the audio is not changing,
Hmm.
and certainly for us, I mean, pitch can change, but consistency of air has helped me realize that I need to be actually way more consistent.
Yeah.
So those things, I'm not fighting those things, and that's hard to
Right.
do. That's
Yeah,
not,
yeah, yeah.
it kind of goes against some of the natural tendencies of the instrument. And
Yeah.
I'm not saying I do that all the time, but I want to make sure that I can do it because it's challenging for me to focus on that stuff. So
Yeah, 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 yeah. I tend to feel like, we're sort of really getting into the nitty-gritty of the horn, and the things that we're discussing may not be important to many people, or definitely not to, somebody who just listens to music,
yeah, yeah,
casually. But however, I feel like if these fundamental things on the horn, and as as players, if we're able to work on these things, it definitely increases our ability to communicate on the instrument, which gives us the ability to connect with those people even better, right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, and I totally agree with that. I have also been part of what has got me as committed to really knowing the sound that's coming out of my horn, or at least trying to control it as much as possible. Control isn't, I don't like the word, but anyways,
Yeah, yeah, I get it.
um, uh, people, I know so many music lovers that I think have more of a musical ear than I do, and
Hmm.
they hear things in people's sounds that they don't need to worry about the technical elements behind it, but they actually can get to the heart of the message maybe faster than a lot of musicians can, because we can get too caught up in that stuff. And I've had great conversations with people that really, in some way, have taught me to, and this is certainly true of any sort of study that you may want to do, but it's like just listen to the music for what it is,
Yeah.
like listen to it for what it is, and get a sense of what that might mean for you, because we all put our own
Yeah.
stuff, I mean, it's hard to not put judgment on these things,
Hmm.
but again, this is like just trying to listen for what's there, and this is
Right.
certainly, I mean, for me, when I was younger, I was drawn to certain saxophone players, and I was less drawn to others because I was guilty of not listening to it for what it was. I was trying to
Right.
put something in the music that had no business being there in the first place. And so
Yeah.
so I lost out of that one,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
took
Yeah.
me a
Yeah.
long time to really, and
I'm
again, this
definitely
has to
guilty
do
of
with
that too.
listening. Yeah, it really all comes down to listening, and how
Yeah.
do you listen? How deeply can you listen?
Mm.
Um, and certainly, I mean, now I have the good luxury of going back and listening to recordings
Mhm.
after maybe years and years of not listening to them, but intently listening when I was first checking them out. It's like,
Yeah.
got into John Coltrane. Well, I got to find every John Coltrane recording, and I got to sit down and listen to it beginning to end and digest as much as I can.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
now I go back to those records. I'm like, well, I certainly didn't digest a quarter of what it was, but
Right. Right.
I love it even more. Every time I go back, we hear new things in these
Yeah.
recordings.
Yeah.
It's not, and it's not always from the theoretical side, or it's like something about the emotional content, or any number of things.
Great.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Well, it's definitely been more than a pleasure chatting with you about all of these things, Kelly. I'd mentioned here that one of the things that I've heard you mention back in 2014 during the summer workshop that I didn't quite get at the time, but has really been helpful for me in recent times is the idea of, I think the phrase you used was, the first type of articulation you should work on is finger articulation. And I was like, finger articulation, which is pretty much slurring. And so for a long time, I worked on everything being slurred, but then I realized it still wasn't, there's still an aspect of it that I didn't get. And recently I sort of went back to it, and there's sort of a way that you can articulate just with the fingers on the horn that I recently realized.
So that's amazing. First of all, that you remember that and that it stuck with you. So, I mean, I guess a couple different concepts for me and why I like to at least focus on that or be aware of it and make sure that I can kind of do it is articulation doesn't mean tonguing all the time, right? As soon as we move from one note to the next and changing pitch, we are that is a form of articulation. We're hearing a different pitch, and it may have to do with the accuracy of your fingers to create to create the illusion of some kind of articulation. Or if it's sloppy, sometimes depending on the note, other notes kind of jump in there. So it really affects. And the other side to it too is time. We're playing time.
Yep,
right?
That's the big one.
And if you don't have time in your fingers, like in some way, if you're focused on, okay, my fingers have to do this, and I got to play with good sound, and my tongue has to do this. Aren't you making it more difficult for yourself?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And again, this isn't as, it's certainly not as easy as I'm making it out to be, or not as cut and dried, because it's about variety. I just want to add that to my way of playing a phrase if I want to, and be just as comfortable with that, knowing that my fingers need to do what they need to do. But then also trying for me to simplify my articulation process so I can use it in hopefully ways that the music needs me to do it, whether it's ensemble playing or things that I know I need to do. But again, all of these things are extensions of my sound. They are not part of my sound.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you listen to somebody like Charlie Parker, and you listen to how he articulated, if you try to recreate or his approach only by tonguing, it's almost impossible, and it almost sounds like over articulating sometimes. And John was one of the people that kind of made me aware of this, and so it's been super helpful for me, as you said, to simplify the amount of tonguing I do, and start with that finger articulation as the foundation. And the big thing is time. I've really struggled with just like developing a really consistent time feel that feels good all the time, that doesn't matter regardless of what I'm playing. And I find that that's been really helpful at making sure that the time is starting here, and that the tongue is really adding accents to phrases.
These are all just little drums, aren't they? And these are just these are drumsticks.
Yeah, man. Well, Kelly, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. I want to do one thing before you wrap up this conversation.
Yes.
We'll end this conversation with I call it 3, 2, 1. So please share 3 albums that have been really influential for you. 2 saxophone players that have been really influential, and then end with 1 piece of advice for the audience.
Whew.
3, 2, 1.
These are they're all extremely difficult questions. So 3 albums, and I'm gonna go chronologically. So Ellington at Newport. 1956. Mostly because of the famous diminuendo and crescendo in blue, 27 choruses of blues in D flat by Paul Gonsalves, who I think is a very unsung hero of the tenor saxophone. So I'll say that one.
Mm-hmm.
I will say A Night at the Village Vanguard, Sonny Rollins,
Okay. Mm-hmm.
1957, the trio recording.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he's just, I love Sonny Rollins. He
Yeah.
had
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
be on one of the, on one of my lists for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the third one, I'll say Miles Davis live at the Plug Nickel.
Oh, okay.
From any of the, I mean, all of the gig was recorded, but that's 1965.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Wayne Shorter,
Okay.
Herbie Hancock, Ron Carter, Tony Williams, they're playing standards with the exception of Agitation,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
every other tune is a standard and they are stretching it and really, creating these beautiful these beautiful improvisations
Mm-hmm.
on standard tunes, and it opened up my ears a lot. I mean, I love Wayne Shorter as well. I think he's a super influential player for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also interesting to note, I didn't really think about it until recently, but they are 3 live recordings also, and I think that that's definitely there's something magical about
Yeah.
hearing live music,
Mm.
and live recorded music where there's just kind of an honesty to it.
Yeah. 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 Cool.
Um,
Two musicians that have been.
okay, so 2 musicians. Okay, so I guess I'll stick with saxophonists,
Mm-hmm. Sure.
although I mean it's 2. That's
Yeah, it's a
uh,
saxophone podcast. So
yeah,
there we
yes, of course.
go.
So I do have to say John Coltrane.
Yeah.
Again, for just I think his contribution to saxophone playing and to the music, and also
Mm-hmm.
just to I would say exposing me to non musical connection. I guess
Mm-hmm.
like there's certainly something I would say that's spiritual about
Yeah.
his music
Mm-hmm.
and about him. And the other I would say is Joe Henderson.
Okay. Cool.
I'm a huge fan of Joe Henderson.
Amazing. Can you leave us with one piece of advice?
Yes. I tell this to my students all the time. I try to live by this. Work hard, but not too hard.
Mm.
Have fun, but not too much fun.
Finding the right balance. Balance is
This is
important.
it.
Yeah,
It's
yeah, yeah,
important. It's important.
yeah. Well, Kelly, thank you so much, man. I want to take a second to shout out one of the podcast subscribers, Nathan Billot. This podcast really wouldn't reach as far as it has, without you guys, all 300 and something of you who have subscribed to the podcast. I'm really hoping to be able to connect with more of the saxophone community worldwide. And Kelly, can you share where we can keep in contact with you and
Oh,
keep up to the things that you're involved in?
sure. I have a website, kellyjefferson.net,
Okay,
and it's got a schedule there, some upcoming performances that are finally starting to come back, which is great.
amazing. Yeah.
And yeah, so you can find some more things out about me there.
Are you on any social media?
At the moment, I'm
Mm-hmm.
taking a little bit of a break from
Cool,
social media.
cool.
So my website is where you'll be able to find at least performances and things like that. So
Amazing. Okay, man, I hope this conversation was beneficial, inspiring for you. And I hope that, Kelly sharing his journey and some of what he does in the practice room helps you on your own musical, artistic, and creative journey. So thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you next time on the next episode. Take care, guys. Thanks again, Kelly.
thank you.